This 6-year-old homeless girl cures an elderly millionaire's mother, but as a reward, she asks for something that makes everyone cry. Comment what you think is going to happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel. To support my work, your help is very important. The skies over Cape Cod were unleashing a torrent of rain that afternoon in March, as little Lily ran barefoot through the cobblestone streets, clutching her wooden box to her chest. At 6 years old, her little feet already knew every stone on the path that led to the town hospital. Her braids dripped with rainwater, mixed with the tears she was trying to hide from her grandma, June, who was hobbling along behind her. "Grandma, I think I found a place for us to take shelter," Lily shouted, pointing to the covered entrance of the hospital. June, a 65-year-old woman with striking Native American features and grey hair, pulled back in a low bun, smiled kindly at her granddaughter. Even though her whole body ached from the effort of carrying the heavy bag with the crafts they hadn't been able to sell that day. It had been exactly 4 months since the fire had consumed the small trailer where they lived, on the poorer side of town. The fire took everything. The photos, the clothes, the few savings June kept under her mattress. It didn't take the most important thing, though. The ancestral knowledge she carried about the medicinal herbs of the New England forests. A gift from her ancestors that she was now passing on to Lily. As they settled under the protection of the hospital's roof, a luxury car screeched to a halt at the entrance. A tall man with graying hair and an impeccable suit got out hurriedly, almost slipping on the wet pavement. David Sterling, 55, owner of the largest hotel chain in the region, had just received the worst news of his life. "Mr. Sterling, please, you need to calm down," said the doctor, accompanying him through the corridors. "Your mother's situation is delicate. The stroke was very extensive." Lily observed everything with her big brown eyes, clutching her box containing the most precious herbs that her grandmother had collected that morning. Inside the hospital, she could hear David's desperate cries. "What do you mean there's nothing more to do? She's my mother. She's 82 years old, but she was perfectly fine. Until yesterday, Eleanor Sterling is the strongest woman I know." When David came out of the hospital, his eyes were red and his hands were shaking. He barely noticed the small figure in front of him and bumped into Lily, knocking over the box she was holding so carefully. The herbs scattered on the wet ground. I'm so sorry," he murmured, bending down to help the girl pick up her herbs. That's when he noticed the peculiar scent emanating from them. "What is this?" Lily looked at her grandmother, who gave a small nod and then replied, "These are special herbs that my grandma collects. This one," she showed a dark green leaf, "with jagged edges, is to heal any pain of the soul." Something in the child's gaze, a mixture of innocence and ancient wisdom, made David pause for a moment. He noticed their simple and worn clothes, the way the older woman leaned against the wall to stay on her feet. "My mother. She's very sick," he said, not knowing exactly why he was opening up to a stranger. "The doctors say she won't wake up." June approached slowly, her dark eyes studying the man in front of her. "Sometimes, sir, the medicine that doctors know isn't the only one that exists," she said in a soft but firm voice. "Our people know secrets that come from the earth, passed down from generation to generation." At that moment, Tiffany, David's wife, arrived at the hospital in a hurry, an elegant woman of 45, with perfectly styled hair even in the rain. She gave Lily and her grandmother a look of disdain before pulling her husband by the arm. "David, Vince is waiting in the car. We need to sort out the hospital paperwork." But before he walked away, Lily placed a small cloth bag in his hands, one of those that her grandmother used to store the most powerful herbs. "Please, make a tea with this for your mother, 3 times a day," she said with a conviction that didn't match her age. David hesitated, looking at the bag in his hands. At any other time, he would have ignored the offer. But something in the Child's gaze, something in the silent dignity of the woman beside her, made him put the bag in his coat pocket. What he didn't know was that this chance encounter on that rainy afternoon would forever change not only his mother's life, but also his own. And that this little girl, who kept herbs in a wooden box, carried with her much more than medicinal plants. She carried the key to a miracle that modern medicine couldn't explain. A week had passed since that meeting in the rain. David watched his mother, Eleanor, through the glass of the hospital room as the nurse changed the sheets. He held in his hands the third bag of herbs he had received from Lily. The first two he had thrown away at Tiffany's insistence, who called it ignorant nonsense. But that morning, something different happened. When Nurse Mary went to check Eleanor's vital signs, she noticed a slight movement in her fingers. At first, she thought it was just an involuntary reflex, common in patients in a vegetative state. But as she got closer, she saw that the old woman's eyes were moving under her closed eyelids. "Dr. Miller, Dr. Miller," Mary called, her voice echoing down the hall. The neurologist in charge of the case arrived quickly, adjusting his glasses as he examined Eleanor. His eyes widened when he noticed the positive responses to stimuli. "This is extraordinary," murmured the doctor, consulting the previous exams. The area affected by the stroke was too extensive. There shouldn't be any kind of neurological response. David felt his legs weaken. He looked at the bag of herbs in his hands and for the first time in days allowed himself to have hope. Ignoring Tiffany's protests, he left the hospital determined to find Lily and her grandmother. The streets of Cape Cod held their own mysteries. After asking several residents, David discovered that June and her granddaughter usually stayed near the town market, selling small crafts and herbal teas. It was there that he found them, Lily sitting on a piece of cardboard, weaving straw with skillful fingers, while June organized small bunches of herbs on a cloth spread on the floor. "She moved," said David without even saying hello. "My mother, she responded to stimuli." June's smile was serene, as if she already expected the news. But there was something in her eyes, a shadow of concern that didn't fit the moment. She stood up with difficulty, leaning on a makeshift cane. "The plants speak to us, Mr. Sterling. They know what we need before we even ask." That's when David really looked around. He saw the damp cardboard where Lily was sitting, the worn clothes they wore, the dry cough that occasionally shook June's body. He took his wallet out of his pocket, but before he could open it, Lily stood up. "We don't want your money, mister," she said, with surprising dignity for her 6 years. "But there's something you could do for us." June tried to interrupt her granddaughter, but Lily continued. "My mom, Maya, she went to work in Boston 2 years ago. Promised to send money, come back to get me, but she never got in touch. Again." The story hit David like a punch to the stomach. While he had the resources to seek the best treatments for his mother, this child lived on the streets, separated from her own mother, surviving thanks to her grandmother's ancestral knowledge. "Help me find her?" asked Lily, her big eyes filled with a hope that broke David's heart. Before he could answer, June was overcome by a severe coughing fit. Her fragile body hunched over, and drops of blood stained the handkerchief she brought to her lips. Lily ran to support her, with the practice of someone who had done it many times. "Grandma! Grandma! Breathe slowly like you taught me!" David acted on instinct, picking up June in his arms despite her weak protests. "I'm going to take you to the hospital right now." "No!" June grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Promise. You'll help Lily first. Promise you'll find Maya." In the car on the way to the hospital, David kept thinking about how fate had woven this improbable plot. His mother, one of the wealthiest women in the region, was being saved by the ancestral knowledge of a woman who had nowhere to live. And now, that same woman was dying in the back of his imported car, while her granddaughter held her hand and whispered ancient Native American songs. What David didn't know was that, At that very moment, in his office at the most luxurious hotel in Cape Cod, his wife Tiffany was in Vince's arms, his business partner. Between kisses, they discussed how Eleanor's unexpected improvement could ruin their plans. "If she recovers," said Vince, adjusting his tie, "we'll never be able to take control of the hotels. The old woman still owns 40% of the shares." Tiffany smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then we need to make sure she doesn't recover, and I know exactly how to do it." At the hospital, while the doctors examined June, David made 2 calls. The first was to the best private detective he knew, the second to his lawyer. If there was a missing person to find, he would use all the resources he had. What he didn't imagine was that every step taken in that direction would lead him to discover increasingly dark secrets. Secrets that would forever change the fate of everyone involved in this story. Lily, sitting in the waiting room with her box of herbs on her lap, watched the movement of the hospital with attentive eyes. In her childish mind, she was beginning to understand that something much bigger than her was in motion. Something that had started with a simple act of compassion on a rainy afternoon and now threatened to reveal long-buried truths. The hospital corridors gained a new routine in the weeks that followed. Every morning, punctually at 9 o'clock, Lily arrived carrying her inseparable box of herbs. First, she went to the room of her grandmother June, who had been diagnosed with advanced pulmonary fibrosis. Then, she went to visit Eleanor Sterling, who each day showed more evident signs of recovery. What no one expected was the special connection that formed between the girl and Mrs. Sterling. Eleanor, who could now keep her eyes open for increasingly longer periods, lit up when Lily entered her room. The little girl sat on the edge of the bed and told stories that her grandmother had taught her about plants that grew in the full moon and flowers that only opened for those who had kindness in their heart. "You have blessed hands, little one," whispered Eleanor one afternoon, her voice still weak but clear. It was the first complete sentence she had managed to form since the stroke, bringing tears to the eyes of David, who watched the scene from the door. But while some bonds were strengthened, others were silently undone. Tiffany rarely appeared at the hospital, always claiming unavoidable commitments at the hotels. What no one knew was that she spent her afternoons in Vince's apartment, planning every detail of her revenge. "The problem isn't just the old woman getting better," said Vince, pouring himself another shot of whiskey. "It's that old Indian woman. She knows too much about plants if she finds out we're tampering with the teas." Tiffany adjusted her designer dress in front of the mirror, a cold smile on her perfectly painted lips. "She won't find out. And even if she does, who's going to believe a sick beggar?" But Tiffany underestimated the power of ancestral wisdom. On a particularly tense morning, June asked to be taken in her wheelchair to Eleanor's room. Her experienced eyes immediately noticed something wrong with the herbs in the tea that was being served. "These aren't the plants that Lily prepared," she murmured, her weak body trembling with indignation. "Someone switched the herbs, someone who wants to do harm." David, who was present, felt his blood run cold. June's words confirmed his own suspicions. In recent days, he had noticed important documents disappearing from his office, whispered conversations that ceased when he approached. That same afternoon, the detective hired by David brought the first information about Maya, Lily's mother. The report was disturbing. The last time she was seen was entering the Silver Mansion, a traditional Boston family known for their political power, but also for dark rumors about how they treated their employees. "I managed to infiltrate someone into the house," explained the detective, showing photos of the place. "There's evidence of people held in conditions analogous to slavery. Maya could be one of them." David spent the night sleepless, planning how to rescue Maya without alerting the Silvers, who had powerful connections. But his plan was interrupted by a phone call at 3 in the morning. June had worsened drastically, At the hospital, Lily refused to leave her grandmother's side. Her little hands prepared compresses with herbs. Her lips murmured ancient Native American prayers. June, between coughing fits, began to pass on her most precious knowledge. "Look, my little one," she said in a halting voice, "the moon is waxing. It's time to harvest the sleep herb, but only the leaves that grow facing east. The secret isn't just in the plant, it's in the intention of the harvester." David watched those lessons with a heavy heart. It was as if June was racing against time, trying to ensure that her ancestral knowledge would not be lost with her. In her feverish delirium, June began to reveal secrets she had kept for years. She spoke about how her daughter Maya was always too kind, trusting the wrong people. She told about the night she received a frightened phone call from her, saying that she had discovered something terrible in the Silvers' house, something involving important people from Cape Cod. "Take care of her, David," June pleaded on a particularly difficult night. "When I'm gone, Lily will need protection. There are powerful people who don't want certain secrets to come to light." Meanwhile, in the next room, Eleanor was beginning to recover not only her speech, but also her memories. And with them came disturbing memories about conversations she had overheard between Tiffany and Vince, about documents she had seen being falsified, about a plan that had started long before her stroke. On a rainy morning, much like the one in which this whole story began, June called Lily close. Her eyes, although tired, shone with an ancient intensity. "Remember the story of the hummingbird I told you? The one that carried water in its beak to put out the fire in the forest?" Lily nodded, holding her grandmother's hand tightly. "The other animals laughed at him, said he was too small to make a difference. But he kept going, because he knew he was doing his part. You are like that hummingbird, my little one. You seem fragile, but you carry within you the strength of generations." That night, as the rain fell outside, David received 2 pieces of news that would change the course of everything. His detective had located Maya and planned her rescue for the following week. And Tiffany, his wife, had been seen entering Eleanor's room outside visiting hours, carrying something hidden in her designer bag. Maya's rescue didn't go as David had planned. On a moonless night, when the investigators were preparing to act, she herself managed to escape from the Silver Mansion. She was found staggering on a back road in Boston, barefoot, with chain marks on her ankles and a haunted look that spoke of years of suffering. "My daughter. I need to see my daughter," were her first words in the Boston hospital, before even accepting water or food. David immediately flew to Boston in his private jet. He found Maya, 28 years old, still beautiful despite the marks of captivity, with the same big expressive eyes as Lily. She trembled as she told her story, the words coming out between sobs. "They kept me locked up. I cleaned the house day and night without rest. When I discovered the documents in the office, I understood why they wouldn't let me leave." Her eyes filled with terror. "They have connections in Cape Cod, important people involved in terrible things." In the Cape Cod hospital, June worsened every day. Even so, she insisted on teaching Lily all the secrets of the herbs she knew. "Look, little one," she said in a weak voice, "when the leaf has this silvery spot, it's because it's at the right point to be harvested. And always thank the plant before you harvest it." Eleanor, on the other hand, showed increasingly evident signs of recovery, now able to sit up in bed and feed herself. On a particularly significant afternoon, she held Lily's hand and said something that surprised everyone. "Did you know that your mother worked here at my house many years ago? She was just a girl. She must have been about 16 years old. So sweet, so dedicated, until Tiffany sent her away without explanation." This revelation hit David like lightning. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Tiffany knew Maya, knew her story. Was she also involved with the Silvers? Meanwhile, Vince began to show signs of nervousness. He was seen arguing with Tiffany in the empty hallways of the hotel. They're going to find out everything. The girl is alive, and if she talks about the documents she saw... Tiffany silenced him with a brutal kiss. Keep calm. I have everything under control. Soon Eleanor will have a mysterious relapse. And as for Maya, well, accidents happen. What they didn't know was that Eleanor, more lucid every day thanks to Lily's treatments, was beginning to remember conversations she had overheard before her stroke. She remembered documents she had seen by chance, numbers that didn't make sense. In the hotel accounts, on a particularly tense morning, June asked to speak with David alone. Her face was paler than normal, and she held a small cloth bundle. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "On the night of the fire that destroyed our home, it wasn't an accident. I saw someone leaving in the shadows. Someone who uses the same French perfume as your wife." David felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He remembered how Tiffany had insisted that he not help Lily and her grandmother, how nervous she became whenever he mentioned looking for Maya. In the next room, Lily prepared another of the special teas for Eleanor, humming softly an ancient Native American song that her grandmother had taught her. That's when she noticed something strange in the pitcher of water on the table, a slight residue at the bottom, almost imperceptible. Her little hands trembled as she collected a sample of that white powder. She ran to her grandmother, interrupting the conversation with David. June examined the residue and her aged face turned even paler. "It's poison," she whispered. "Someone is trying to kill Eleanor." At that same moment, they heard the sound of glass breaking in the hallway. It was Tiffany, who had dropped her bag while trying to sneak into Eleanor's room. Several small vials fell from it, identical to the one containing the residue found by Lily. But before anyone could react, a new presence appeared in the hospital room. Maya, still weak but determined, stood in the doorway. Her eyes, so much like Lily's, fixed on Tiffany with a mixture of fear and resolution. "I remember you," said Maya, her voice trembling. "You were the one who sold me to the Silvers. You were the one who said there was a wonderful job waiting for me in Boston." Tiffany's always composed face contorted into a mask of hatred. In seconds, everything turned to chaos. She tried to flee, pushing Maya violently. David ran to stop her, but she was already in the hallway. That's when June, gathering strength that no one knew she still had, rose from her bed. Her wobbly legs barely supported her, but her voice had the strength of centuries of ancestry. "You can run, but you can't escape the truth. The plants don't lie, and they told me your story a long time ago." At that moment, as if the universe conspired to reveal all the secrets at once, Vince appeared in the hallway, carrying a briefcase full of documents. His face was distraught. "It's over, Tiffany. The Silvers have been arrested. They told everything about the human trafficking scheme, about how you used the hotels to launder the money. I can't go to jail, I can't." And then, in a movement that no one could have predicted, Vince tripped in his own haste. The briefcase flew from his hands, scattering papers all over the hallway. Among them, old photos showed Tiffany alongside. The Silvers, documents detailed a complex scheme of crimes that stretched for years. In the middle of that chaos, little Lily remained beside her grandmother, her big eyes registering every detail. She didn't understand all the words that were said, all the crimes that were revealed, but she understood something much deeper, the power of truth, which, like the plants that her grandmother had taught her to respect, always finds a way to come to light. The chaos that had taken over the hospital after the revelations was followed by a heavy silence. Tiffany had managed to escape in the turmoil, leaving behind her expensive bag and a trail of destruction. Vince, in a state of shock, was taken for medical observation after having a nervous breakdown in the hallway. But the real drama was unfolding. In June's room, The Native American woman, after that last moment of ancestral strength, had collapsed in her bed, her breathing more difficult than ever. Lily refused to leave her side, her little hands preparing herb compresses with a skill that seemed to come from other lives. "Grandma, hold on," she whispered, silent tears running down her childish face. "Mommy's back, Grandma. You need to get better so we can be a family again." Maya, still weak from captivity, approached her mother's bed. The reunion between them was heartbreaking. Two women marked by suffering, separated by human cruelty, finally reunited, but with time slipping through their fingers like grains of sand. "Mom," Maya held June's hand, her voice choked. "Forgive me for believing her, for leaving Lily. I tried to escape so many times." June opened her eyes, a weak smile illuminating her wrinkled face. "There's nothing to forgive, my daughter. You were also a victim, but now—" A violent cough interrupted her, staining the handkerchief that Lily was holding with red. Across the hall, in Eleanor's room, David was trying to process everything he had discovered about his wife. The scattered documents revealed a web of crimes that stretched for years: human trafficking, money laundering, extortion. Tiffany was not just an accomplice, she was one of the main architects of the scheme. "How could I have been so blind?" he murmured, sitting heavily in the chair next to his mother's bed. Eleanor, now able to speak more clearly thanks to Lily's treatments, held her son's hand. "Don't blame yourself, my son. She deceived us all, but there were signs. That's why she tried to silence me." That's when Eleanor revealed something that would change everything. "Weeks before my stroke, I found documents in the office, old letters between Tiffany and the Silvers. She had a scheme to recruit young and vulnerable girls, promising legitimate jobs. Maya wasn't the first." In the hallway, Vince was being taken to another room, still in shock. But before entering the elevator, he shouted something that chilled everyone's blood. "The fire! She was the one who ordered them to set fire to their house. She wanted to destroy the evidence that Maya had saved." This revelation hit Lily like lightning. The girl dropped the herbs she was preparing and ran to her wooden box, the one she always carried with her. With trembling fingers, she opened a secret compartment at the bottom. "Grandma!" she called, her small voice trembling with emotion. "The photos that Mommy sent, I saved them from the fire. They were inside the herb box." David approached, incredulous. In the photos, yellowed by time, Tiffany appeared alongside the Silvers on different occasions. In one of them, particularly revealing, she was handing an envelope to the patriarch of the family, while a young woman who looked a lot like Maya was in the background, clearly frightened. But there was no time to process that discovery. A high-pitched sound from a heart monitor began to sound in June's room. The Native American woman was having a severe crisis. "Quick!" shouted a nurse, running to call the doctors. It was at that moment that Lily had an idea. She ran to her box and took out a small bag of herbs that her grandmother had given her weeks before. "Grandma said this was only for the greatest emergency of all," she explained to Maya, who watched in amazement. "She said it has the power to heal, but it can only be used once in a lifetime." Before anyone could stop her, Lily began to prepare the tea, following exactly the instructions her grandmother had given her. Her small hands worked with the precision of an experienced healer, while her lips murmured the ancient words that June had taught her. The aroma that spread through the room was unlike anything they had ever smelled before. It was as if the forest itself had been distilled into a single cup. "It's the sacred mixture," whispered Eleanor from the doorway, where she had been brought. "In her wheelchair. June told me about it. It's made with 7 herbs that only bloom in the full moon, harvested with specific prayers." While the doctors tried to stabilize June, Lily managed to get her grandmother to drink a few drops of the tea. The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes were fixed on the Native American woman, whose face gradually gained color. At that exact moment, sirens began to sound outside the hospital. The police had located Tiffany, trying to flee at the airport. But for Lily, none of that mattered. Her attention was entirely focused on her grandmother, who was now slowly opening her eyes. "My little healer," murmured June, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "You have learned well." Maya's tears mingled with Lily's, while David watched the scene with a lump in his throat. Somehow that family had managed to preserve not only the ancestral knowledge, but also the strength of love through all the adversities. In the hallway, the police were already coming up to take statements. The documents scattered by Vince would be fundamental to dismantle the entire criminal network. But inside that room, something much more important was happening. A miracle, born from the union between ancient wisdom and the unconditional love of a child. 6 months had passed since that intense night in the hospital. Spring was arriving in Cape Cod, bringing with it an explosion of colors and aromas that made Lily's eyes shine with joy as she carefully harvested herbs in the medicinal garden that now occupied a significant area of the hospital. "Remember to thank the plants, my little one," said June, sitting in her wheelchair under the shade of a leafy tree. Her health had stabilized almost miraculously after taking the sacred tea prepared by Lily. Although she still needed constant care, her voice had regained the strength of the old days, especially when teaching the secrets of the herbs to the doctors and nurses who now sought her out regularly. The medicinal garden had become a revolutionary project in the hospital. After Eleanor's extraordinary recovery and June's surprising stabilization, the medical community could no longer ignore the power of traditional medicine. David, deeply transformed by the events of recent months, had dedicated an entire wing of the hospital to the integration between conventional medicine and ancestral wisdom. "And who would have thought," commented Eleanor, approaching with firm steps, she who months before was in a vegetative state. "We needed to lose almost everything to discover what really matters." Maya, who now worked as the coordinator of the medicinal garden project, smiled as she watched her daughter explaining the properties of each plant to a group of doctors. Lily, at 6 years old, had become a little teacher, blending her grandmother's ancient wisdom with a natural intuition that impressed everyone. "You need to harvest this leaf very early," she explained to a doctor who was taking notes attentively, "when it still has dew. And always ask permission from the plant first. Grandma says they listen with the heart of the earth." On the other side of the garden, Vince watched the scene from the window of his hospital room. The nervous breakdown he had suffered on that night of revelations had been only the beginning of a long process of redemption. After confessing his participation in Tiffany's schemes and collaborating with the investigations, he was now receiving psychiatric treatment, ironically also benefiting from June's medicinal herbs. "It's funny," he said to David during one of his visits. "I spent years chasing money and power, and in the end, the real cure was in the hands of a child who had nothing." Tiffany's arrest had occupied newspaper headlines for weeks. The human trafficking scheme she coordinated with the Silvers was much larger than they had imagined. Dozens of women were freed, each with a story as painful as Maya's. Many of them now found solace and healing in the medicinal garden, where June and Lily welcomed them with teas specially prepared to heal the pain of the soul. "Each plant has its purpose," June taught her new apprentices, "just as each person has their mission in the world. The secret is to discover what yours is and honor that path." One particularly significant afternoon, David gathered everyone in the garden for an important announcement. After months of legal and bureaucratic work, the hospital would officially establish the first integrative medicine wing in Massachusetts, combining conventional treatments with traditional Native American knowledge. This place will be called the June Integrative Medicine Wing, he announced, moved, because it was a Native American woman who taught us that true healing comes from the union of knowledge and love. Eleanor, who now actively participated in the administration of the hotels alongside her son, added her own surprise. Part of the profits from the establishments would be destined for a fund for the preservation and research of traditional medicinal knowledge. "And there's one more thing," said Maya, holding her daughter's hand. "We're going to start a project in the schools. Lily will help teach children about the importance of medicinal plants and the preservation of ancestral wisdom." Little Lily, who had grown so much in wisdom in recent months, smiled when she heard her name. But her eyes were fixed on something beyond the garden, a hummingbird that hovered over a newly opened purple flower. "Grandma," she called softly, "remember the story of the hummingbird you told me? The one that carried water in its beak to put out the fire in the forest?" June nodded, her eyes shining with pride and emotion. "Now I understand," Lily continued. "It doesn't matter if we're small. What matters is not giving up on doing good, even when it seems impossible." At that moment, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate, a light rain began to fall, making the plants in the garden shine under the light of the late afternoon. Maya hugged her daughter, while June raised her face to feel the raindrops, silently, thanking the ancestors who had preserved that knowledge through the centuries. David watched the scene with his heart overflowing with gratitude. His mother Eleanor was alive and healthy. His hotel empire now served a purpose greater than mere profit, and he had learned the most valuable of lessons, that true wealth lies not in material possessions, but in the wisdom that multiplies when it is shared with love. The medicinal garden had become much more than a healing space. It was a living symbol of how the union between different worlds and knowledge could transform lives. There, among carefully cultivated herbs and flowers, little Lily continued her mission, carrying in her small hands not only the knowledge of her ancestors, but also the hope of a future where ancient wisdom and modern science walk together, healing not only bodies, but also hearts. And so, under the soft rain of that spring afternoon, the story that began with a girl offering tea to a desperate businessman transformed into a legacy that would continue to live on for generations, proving that the greatest miracles are born from the simplest gestures when guided by love and ancestral wisdom.